War has been a part of human history forever. Open any history book, and you will find countless tales of how people came up with different reasons to wage war on their counterparts. One of the more reoccurring themes of these conflicts has been disputes over religion and ideologies. So today, we will tell you about the War of the Three Henrys. This was the 8th conflict in the series of civil wars in France known as the War of Religion. So, let us not waste any more time and get straight into the conflict. As the name suggests, the war was fought between 3 parties. The first was King Henry III of France, who was supported by the Royalists and the Politiques. Then there was King Henry of Navarre, who was presumptive to the French throne and leader of the Huguenots, a religious group of French Protestants. He was supported by Elizabeth I of England and the Protestant princes of Germany. The final part of this conflict was Henry of Lorraine, who was the Duc of Guise and leader of the Catholic League, which was funded by Philip II of Spain. Now let us take a look at the background of this conflict. Lutheranism. The doctrines of Martin Luther was first introduced to France during the reign of Francis I from 1515 to 1574, and it flowed unhindered for more than a year around Paris. Although France was a staunch opponent of heresy, it was first difficult for him to define what constituted it. Catholic theology and the notion of orthodox belief were both ambiguous. In the midst of France's growing religious schism, Francis I attempted to pursue a medium course. Calvinism, a Protestant religion, was founded by John Calvin, who was born in Nyon, Picardy in 1509 and fled France after the Placards affair in 1536. Calvinism, in particular, appears to have benefited much from the nobility's support. It is thought to have begun with Louis Bourbon, Prince of Condé, who traveled through Geneva, Switzerland on his way home from a military battle and heard a Calvinist preacher preach. Louis Bourbon would later become a key figure among France's Huguenots. Jeanne d'Albret, Queen Regent of Navarre, converted to Calvinism in 1560, probably as a result of Theodore de Bezet's influence. Her son, Henry of Navarre, would become a leader among the Huguenots after she married Antoine de Bourbon. Until the affair of the Placards, Francis I continued his strategy of seeking a middle ground in France's religious schism. The Placard affair began in 1534 when Protestants began posting anti-Catholic posters. The anti-Catholic language on the posters was virulent, particularly the outright rejection of the Catholic teaching of real presence. Protestantism became known as a religion of rebels, which made it easier for the Catholic Church to label Protestantism as heresy. The French monarch took a tougher stance against the demonstrators in the aftermath of the posters. Francis I had been chastised for his earlier tolerance of Protestants, and he was now pressured to suppress them. On March 31, 1547, King Francis I died, and his son Henry II ascended to the throne. During the closing years of his father's reign, Henry II pursued his father's rigorous religious policies. The Edict of Chateaubriand, issued in 1551, severely restricted Protestant rights to worship, gather, or even discuss religion at work, in the fields, or over a meal. Hundreds of underground Calvinist congregations were established in France during the 1550s as a result of an orchestrated migration of Calvinist preachers from Geneva and elsewhere. This clandestine Calvinist preaching, also seen in the Netherlands and Scotland, allowed for the establishment of covert alliances with nobility, which swiftly led to more direct measures to win political and religious dominance. Even though the French monarchy granted increasingly liberal legislative concessions and toleration edicts, Roman Catholic antipathy to the Huguenots rose, as they gained authority and expressed their faith more openly. These measures, however, masked rising tensions between Protestants and Catholics. All this tension spurred 8 civil wars. However, we are concerned about the last one, so we are going to talk about that in detail. War begins. In particular, the War of the Three Henries was instigated by Philip of Spain to deter his rival, France, from interfering with his army in the Netherlands and his planned invasion of England. The Catholic League persuaded King Henry III to issue an edict prohibiting Protestantism and nullifying Henry of Navarre's claim to the throne. Henry III was possibly swayed by the royal favorite, Anne de Joyeuse. The Royalists and the Catholic League were uncomfortable partners against their shared enemy, the Huguenots, for the first half of the war. Henry dispatched Joyeuse to fight Navarre while he prepared to face the approaching German and Swiss troops. Navarre defeated the royal army led by Joyeuse in the conflict of Coutras. The Duke himself was killed in the battle. It was the Huguenots' first major win on the battlefield. Henry III, for his part, was successful in preventing the German and Swiss troops from colliding. The Swiss were his allies, and they had come to attack France to free him from slavery. However, Henry III claimed that their invasion was against him, compelling them to return home. The Germans, led by Fabian, 1st Burgrave of Dauphine, desired to attack the Duc of Guise in order to repeat Coutras' success. He enlisted the help of some of the fleeing Swiss, who had no qualms about attacking Guise. Guise, on the other hand, caught the Germans off guard and routed them at the Battle of Vimory. The Duke of Guise received all the glory in Paris for repelling the German and Swiss Protestants. The king's actions were regarded with disdain. They believed the king had asked the Swiss to invade, paid them for their services, and then sent them back. The king, who had played a pivotal role in the campaign and expected to be rewarded for it, was taken aback when the popular voice declared against him. The Catholic League had made effective use of its preachers. In the interim, the deaths of Joyeuse and Condé deserted the governments of Normandy and Picardy. Guise claimed Normandy and Picardy for himself and his cousin Aumale. Both requests were turned down by the king. To oppose the royal appointments in these regions, the Catholic League was formed. Guise was not allowed to enter the capital. Guise went to Paris despite the restriction. In normal circumstances, this would have resulted in his death, but the Duke was well liked by the people. The king also opted to flee to Blois after the Day of the Barricades. The Day of the Barricades was a spontaneous uprising against the king and was coordinated by the ambassador of the King of Spain, Bernardino de Mendoza. Basically, in response to Guise's arrival in the city, the king, headquartered in the Palais de Louvre, mustered numerous battalions of Swiss guards and the Garde Française in the capital, a violation of the city of Paris's privilege of not having foreign troops quartered in the city. Rumors circulated that the heads of the House of Guise's Catholic faction were about to be arrested. The king ordered a census of Paris, which was to be a very exact search of houses with lists of people, arms, and horses in order to flush out any strangers or non-Parisians in the city, including forces of the Duc de Guise. In response, the public revolted. Wagons, timbers, and hogsheads were used to block entry to key places across the city, beginning early in the day in the University Quarter, where a certain Crousset, the Guises' leader, coordinated efforts. The hurriedly erected barricades in the streets, made from whatever materials were available, were the first appearance of that mainstay of French revolutions. The militia was the backbone of the uprising, while the royal forces were stranded in several quarters. By consenting to rescue the royal forces while claiming to save the city, he was able to project an image of his innocence and virtue, while actually delivering a fatal blow to the king's authority. The Duc de Guise explained, after accepting an urgent message from the king to allow the orderly withdrawal of the foreign troops. All of Paris's gates were locked except the Porte Saint-Honoré. Thus, the royal army fled to the Louvre. The king was denied access to the Sainte-Chapelle the next day, May 13, 1588, but the Porte Neuve between the Louvre and the Tuileries was left unprotected. Henry was persuaded to fly to Chartres in an urgent telegram from the Hôtel de Guise, which may have betrayed Guise's ambiguous intentions or followed his desires, not being seen to hurt the king. By the end of the day, 60 soldiers had been murdered in sporadic violence. The Bastille had surrendered, and the Duc de Guise had absolute control of Paris, where he had been given the throne, but turned it down. The tumult's timing was not as closely coordinated with the Spanish Armada's launching of England as the Spanish envoy Mendoza had hoped, but it was nevertheless effective in diverting Huguenot attention. Guise used his strong position to force the king to sign the Edit d'Union at Rouen, which was registered in Paris on July 21st. By its terms, the king promised never to make a truce or peace with the hérétiques, to forbid public office to anyone who refused to take a public oath of Catholicité, and to never leave the throne to a prince who was not Catholic. Secret clauses extended amnesty to all deeds of the Catholic League, accorded support to its troops, and turned over additional fortified palaces de sécurité to the League. Meanwhile, the Spanish Armada was destroyed on its way to England. In the aftermath of the Spanish Armada's loss in 1588, the monarch convened to the Estates Générales, which was rife with intrigue and planning. The 45 planned to assassinate the monarch and steal the throne, but the king countered by having Guise slain by his guards. The Royalists and the Catholic League went to a full-fledged war. Guise's younger brother, Charles, Duke of Mayenne, assumed command of the League. He appeared to be powerless in the face of his foes at the time. His authority was effectively limited to the districts of Blois, Tours, and the adjacent areas. The King of France ultimately sought out his cousin and heir, the King of Navarre, during these trying circumstances. While the Protestants resurrected the strong concepts of royalty and divine right, Henry III vowed that Protestants would no longer be labeled heretics. The ideas of tolerance and royalism were connected on the side of the two monarchs, just as ultra-Catholic and anti-royalist ideologies were intimately associated on the other side. Henry III enlisted the help of the Swiss, who were eager to help him. The Catholic royalist fealty was rekindled. The king saw himself leading 40,000 warriors at Pontoise. His newly resurrected authority may have inspired him with great plans. He planned to conquer Paris in order to put an end to the League's power for good. Even the citizens of Paris believed that the city would fall. To revenge Guise's murder, the League's preachers sanctioned regicide. A Dominican monk named Jacques Clement secured an audience with the king in the royal camp at Saint-Cloud in July 1589 and drove a long knife into his spleen. Clement was assassinated on the scene, taking with him knowledge about who, if anyone, had hired him. On his deathbed, Henry III summoned Henry of Navarre and pleaded with him to convert to Catholicism in the name of statecraft, noting the horrible fighting that would occur if he refused. Henry Navarre, who became Henry IV, was named as his heir. For nearly a decade, Henry IV and the Catholic League fought each other. The battle was finally put to an end in 1598, when Henry IV issued the Edict of Nantes, which renounced Protestantism in favor of Roman Catholicism. The proclamation established Catholicism as France's national religion, but it also gave Protestants equal standing with Catholics in the kingdom and religious and political freedom inside their domains. The order also safeguarded Catholic interests by prohibiting the establishment of new Protestant churches in Catholic-controlled areas. Pressures to leave France eased after the declaration of the Edict of Nantes and the following safeguarding of Huguenot rights. The proclamation granted Protestants several particular concessions in exchange for their general freedom of conscience, including pardon and the restoration of their civil rights, such as the right to work in any sector for the state and the right to bring problems directly to the king. The religious wars that had rocked France in the second half of the 16th century came to an end with this. So that is all the time we had today, folks. Hope you enjoyed this video. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel and do hit the bell icon on your way out. See you all next time.